Today, we are covering the emotional drivers behind Candida and thrush. Welcome back to the Mind Change Podcast. I'm your host, Heather McKean. Please take a moment to like, subscribe, download, and comment. It really helps us to continue to create all this great content for you, and it lets us know what topics you're most interested in hearing about. Candida is a naturally occurring fungus that lives on your body, and it is a part of our natural microflora, or the microorganisms that commonly live in or on our bodies. And it can be found in the GI tract, the mouth, and in women, the vagina. Most of the time, it causes no issues, but in some cases, there is an overgrowth of that fungus, and that's where infections can occur. Now, there are many different species of the Candida fungus. In the US, Candida infection in the mouth is called oral thrush, but in other parts of the world, the word thrush is used to describe vaginal overgrowth of Candida. Cases of Candida of all types are dramatically on the rise all around the world. It is estimated that 1 in 3 people suffers from yeast overgrowth or Candida. The number one contributor to this increase is pharmaceutical drugs, especially antibiotics, corticosteroids, and some birth control pills. The pharmaceutical revolution has taken quite a toll on our microbiome and our immune system. Pills were never meant to be the answer. Though they can sometimes provide a bridge, they rarely treat the root cause and can cause many side effects in our body. And then our bodies continue to fight back to be heard. Now, Candida is often linked to eating too much sugar. But it isn't so much the sugar that's causing the problem as the reason why our bodies are craving sugar and have a difficult time knowing what to do with it. Now, that's almost always going to go back to an attachment wound, usually with the mother. And it's the body's way of communicating that we needed more sweetness or nurturing in our very young years. Now, regardless of what you call it or which species you may be dealing with, the emotional drivers are basically the same. So let's dive in. Some of the childhood contributors could be feeling deprived of love during childhood. As an infant, you may have cried and screamed a lot. That meant you desired physical touch, comfort, closeness. You needed to be hugged, snuggled with abundance. But instead, you maybe were fed, changed, or scolded, or ignored, as if your care was more of a duty or chore than the mother's desire. And eventually you would have learned that the only way to get attention was to keep crying. And the more profound that need is, then the more that it will take, the more time and the more energy it will take for that need to be noticed. And if that need continues to go unmet, then there's a semblance of care that gets to be settled for. So for instance, like I mentioned, rather the baby is needing to be hugged and held close and comforted. But oftentimes then what happens is, and mothers doing the best that they know how to do at the time, they are like, what's wrong? So they change or they feed or they do these various things. And so what happens is the infant then becomes more like, okay, I'll settle for this at least. At least I'm being touched in some way. But what that does is that it really still creates an incongruency or a debt or a deficit of that deeper held need. And then what happens is that cycle continues to play out throughout your life. The cycle of needing something deeper, needing something real, needing something more nurturing, but settling for things that sort of get there or almost get there. You may have been made to believe that your needs were unimportant, burdensome, or too much. It's possible that a primary caregiver may have made you feel ashamed, guilty, or wrong for needing more. They may have frequently highlighted their sacrifices for you, or uh, somehow communicated that you owe an unpayable debt to them for having you, for raising you, for caring for you. So it's also common in this condition that guilt or guilt trips were commonly used in your family of origin. Now, all of this leads to a belief that you were intrinsically unlovable or bad. And then we'll make sense of that consciously as an adult now, like, no, that's not what it meant. And mothers have a lot going on and they're doing the best that they can. As a child, and especially as a very young child, all they can really do is see through a lens of it must be something with me. You may have had a mother who had a lot of unhealed emotional pain or trauma herself, and this left her unable to give beyond what she had. She may have tried, but ultimately ended up lacking. You may have felt trapped or engulfed in your relationship with your mother, and that led to a codependency or an enmeshment in the relationship. It's also possible that you were not allowed to advocate for yourself or create safe boundaries. And this would have been seen as rebellious or selfish, the boundaries, or if you had certain lines that you felt like couldn't be crossed or shouldn't be crossed, then that would have been perceived as you being rebellious or selfish rather than having some sense of self-care. Your family may have focused on more heavily on what went wrong instead of what went right about things in life. And this would have left a bitter taste in your mouth that you've been trying to sweeten up ever since childhood. You may have felt criticized, attacked, that could have been verbally or physically if you didn't do things right. And this would have led you to be very hard on yourself, as to not make any more mistakes that would take away the little bit of love that you were trying to survive off of in your family structure. Now, in later adolescence or teen years, you may have used poor self-esteem and self-condemnation to misbehave or underperform or act out. And this would have been due to your lack of connection in your early years. You could have been overly indulgent in other behaviors trying to fill that void. So that could have looked like drug and alcohol use at an early age, binging on food or finding comfort in food, or even possibly controlling food on the other direction, which would have been eating disorders of the kind that you would hold back from yourself, so anorexia or even bulimia, where you would binge and then purge. And all of this would have gone back to those original ideas of needing more than you had been given, or what you had been given at times. This is often the case with the bulimia side of it, is when you were given to, it was so overwhelming or so enmeshing or so overpowering or unhealthy that you felt then the need to purge that. It's also common that shopping at a young age would have been a coping mechanism at this time before the Candida later in life showed up. So another belief system here is that you've got the idea that life is going to be a fight, a constant struggle, that authority figures in your life, rather than being nurturing or loving or shaping, seemed actually controlling, dominating, or manipulative. So you could have gone completely the other direction and became the support for other people that you needed. So that the only way that you received validation was to serve and sacrifice for others. And of course, deep inside, you're hoping and wishing that by doing this, someone will actually do the same for you. But oftentimes, we're dealing with parents that are dealing with their own things, and they don't even know that this is happening. And so as much as you serve, as much as you sacrifice, as much as you do, they are still in a place where they can only give what they have, and what they have is lacking. So even through all of that work, you'll still not get the kind of nurturing in the amount that you may have needed it as a child. Now, in our adult years, this is some of the ways that all of this plays out. Now, with Candida overgrowth in general, we find that one of the most common drivers is that you are holding on to a great deal of resentment, irritation, and anger. You feel frustrated because people never seem to recognize all that you do for them. You feel that you're constantly committing selfless acts, and yet you don't receive the admiration or attention that you feel like it deserves. You feel that you need to let others know how much you have suffered and sacrificed to serve them. And if you think back about that, that's often tied to a primary caregiver, oftentimes the mothers, but not always, having that same sort of demeanor, saying those same sorts of things as a way for them to cope with their own usually insecurities and misgivings. So oftentimes we end up doing this in our adult life without ever realizing the connection. And you can be doing this in not just your own family environment, but it can also play out in work environments. Like you're the one that always takes on extra and goes above and beyond, but then you're resentful about it or feel like you're being taken advantage of, when it's really you that went after more responsibility and more work. But what that ends up is making you feel like you're being used or abused or taken advantage of. It can also happen in religious environments where you end up mad at God because the feeling is, God, look at all that I've done for you, all that I've given up for you. Look at the way my life is because I choose to serve you. And that, again, is that whole program that gets triggered and comes into play is reminiscent from something oftentimes in our childhood. We may not even remember that it was there, but it's very often linked to a childhood behavior that someone employed with us. You may find yourself as an adult that you often speak in an artificially sweet, calm, or happy tone of voice to other people, when underneath you're actually very irritated or bothered. And sometimes people can pick up on this. You may have witnessed this, or you often may have done this yourself, where you're speaking in a way that sounds very nice and very calm and very patient, and it's very sweet, but there's this feeling that underneath, like you're saying one thing, but you are feeling another thing. And that is our way of coping with wanting to give sweet when we don't really actually have it to give ourselves. And what gets revealed is what's really there, which is often the bitterness or the resentment or anger. So there are often two different extremes that you could end up with as an adult with regard to getting your needs met, depending on the way that it was for you in childhood. One person may be the overly responsible, self-sacrificing, hoping that they will do a good enough job to earn the approval and the validation and the love of others so that maybe someone will do the same thing for them. This person will have a very hard time asking for help. They often have a very hard time communicating their own needs. They want people to just give to them. They want people to just know what they need, to guess, to read the minds of, so that they don't actually have to ask. And in that, wanting people to be mind readers and to give without having any needs in return, oftentimes that's the way that they start to perceive all relationships, is that it is either give or take. And very common with these people, with the self-sacrificers, they've actually unconsciously brought in a lot of people in their realm that would be more perceived as takers. But oftentimes the people take because the person seems so willing to give all the time. And the person doesn't ever communicate that they have needs or communicate that they would like something. And so they think, oh, they seem to be good. So they just continue to take. And there's two people at play in that situation. And so that program needs to be addressed for there to be a change in the way that people do end up giving to you. So these people often feel guilty for even having needs, and they may get pouty or petulant or dejected when others don't read your mind and respond the way that you hope that they would. This leads to guilt trips or that quiet irritation toward the people that you love or the people that you want love from, but you don't ever really fully speak up about the need. Now, on the other extreme, you may turn into a chronic taker. And these people will be almost vampiric with their needs, right? It'll never be enough. They will take, take, take. They are people who are highly demanding in relationships where everything is a one-way street. They feel that they deserve to have their needs come first. So they will guilt, shame, and bully people into caring for them. And it can be severely draining for loved ones. Of course, this comes from those unmet needs in childhood. So you can both have unmet needs in childhood. A mother who, for various reasons, wasn't able to be the sweet, loving, providing, nurturing force, or it also could be with a father, or even a grandparent or a teacher. As children, we need many loving, giving, nurturing caregivers to be whole in our being. And so you can kind of go one or two of these directions, either be the complete self-sacrificing, never get their needs met, never say that they have needs, but feel terrible about it person, or the vampire who takes and takes and takes and takes out of that unmet need as a child, who's so used to not getting their needs met, that's all they ever see. So it's coming out of the same program or the same trauma, the same wound in childhood. There could just be different ways about going about that. And Candida is a message from either one of those. So no matter what extreme that you may have taken, Candida is a driver for either one of those manifestations. And what happens with these people, the ones that are the takers or the energy vampires, what they're actually doing is they're taking the role of the avoidant mother or of the caregiver whose needs were perceived as more important than their own when they were young. And again, this is all subconscious and totally unconscious that they do that. But that's what's happening in the people that choose that way. And we don't choose it. Again, we don't choose it consciously. This is the way that our subconscious mind figures out how to deal with these things. So it either takes the role of the sacrificer or the role of the vampire. And oftentimes that really depends on how you perceived the person that didn't meet your needs as a child. Now, another common driver that is associated with the symptom of Candida around brain fog. So there's something to be known with certain people who are doing Candida, that brain fog tends to be one of those symptoms. And so for those people, for the driver behind that, it's because the unmet needs as a child, so the self-worth mechanisms, become dysfunctional. So this leads to the feeling that you don't have what it takes to make it in life. So everything seems blurry. Everything seems a little like hard to get a hold on, grasp on, which means it's hard to make decisions. So you're scattered, unproductive. And subconsciously, this is still just a cry for help. If you can't do it for yourself, then shouldn't somebody have to help you? And if you can't do it by yourself, and someone should have to help you because you can't do it yourself, then you don't have to feel bad or guilty for asking for help because you absolutely can't do it on your own. So it becomes this incapability program to bypass the guilt that's associated with asking for help. So for these people, intimate relationships can be very challenging. And for people who are doing Candida, they may be holding on to a lot of unconscious anger and resentment from their past. And that leads up into leaking out onto current relationships. Sexual relationships can be very complicated because on one hand, it becomes another way to try and connect and get your needs met. And yet, there tends to be, with people who do Candida, a lot of shame associated with it. So you don't end up trusting intimate relationships. Therefore, you never really give yourself wholly in a sexual relationship because that feels even more revealing, even more vulnerable. Another driver of Candida is that you may have given your power away to a caregiver or an influential person early in your life. And this leads you to feeling that you are not safe in sexual partnerships. You may actually feel, rather than safe or loved or connected, you may actually feel controlled, trapped, or taken advantage of, much like the way that you perceived your care was as a child for the caregiver. So sex becomes dutiful and a chore instead of a joy. It's something that someone must be taking from you rather than you giving out of love. You feel obligated to give, but then eventually you lose any enjoyment from it. And this also makes you resentful and mistrustful of your partner as a way to give yourself permission to pull away and disengage. Now, Candida in and of itself feeds off of negativity, anger, and resentment. So the longer you hold on to these things, even subconsciously or especially subconsciously, then the more that feeds the fungus and the more that it can spread. So many people will adjust their diets. They're going to begin cutting things out, foods out. They'll avoid certain things. They'll label things as bad. But this just stays in alignment with their childhood environment. Things are good or bad. You are good or you're bad. And the dietary things and all of the shifts there may help for a little while. But what happens with that is you will have to continue to starve the need. And we are already starving generally in the need. If you're doing Candida, you're starving for the attention, the nurturing, that need being met from your childhood. And so by taking more things away, you think you're starving the fungus, but you're starving the need, which then just allows the fungus to grow more, oftentimes undercover. What the body needs is to be fed, metaphorically. The Candida needs to be starved of the negativity, but fed unconditional love. Beliefs and experiences of care, nurturing, and needs being met. This will put Candida back in its healthy balance. Now, the way out of this condition, as with most instances of disease within the body, is by going inside the mind and the subconscious programming that helps us develop these conditions in the first place. With mind change, we go after those initial perceived or received messages that parents or caregivers were communicating. And we rewire those messages, and then something different can be put in there. And our goal is to always put the power back where it belongs, back inside of you, meaning you will be the biggest supporter of you. I look forward to seeing you every other week to dive into this fascinating topic. Please make sure to leave those 5-star reviews and comment on a disease, symptom, or ailment you would like to hear covered. As a reminder, you can sign up for the podcast newsletter and get 10% off one-to-one private sessions with one of our qualified practitioners. Until next time, thanks for joining us on the Mind Change podcast, where we are changing the world, one mind at a time.